everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. So I already did a full breakdown of the brand new HBO Harry Potter trailer. In that video I included my thoughts about the show, broke down each part of the trailer, and even included a few Easter eggs. But after going back and watching it a few more times, I realized that there are a ton of small details and even more Easter eggs that I missed. I barely scratched the surface. And while I'm sure there are even more Easter eggs than what I've been able to spot, let me present to you what I've got so far. If you see one that I missed, let me know down in the comment section below. Also, before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more coverage of the show and Harry Potter content in general. The name. This is one that you may have missed altogether, and if you didn't notice it right away, it certainly wouldn't stand out as anything major at first glance. But at the end of the trailer, the title reads, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, not Sorcerer's Stone. Now, this actually ties back to something pretty interesting from the history of the books themselves. When J.K. Rowling first published Harry Potter, the original title was Philosopher's Stone. That was the UK version released in 1997. But when the book was brought over to the US market, Scholastic made the decision to change the name to Sorcerer's Stone, because they felt the word philosopher might not resonate with younger readers. And that change stuck, not just for the books, but for the films as well. So for years, depending on where you lived, the story literally had two different names. But Rowling herself has actually said that if she could go back, she wouldn't have changed it at all. She would have just kept Philosopher's Stone across the board. And now, with this show, that's exactly what they're doing. They've gone back to the original title, and to me, that actually says a lot about the direction they're taking here. Ginny's Reflection. There's a moment in the trailer where Harry's sitting on the Hogwarts Express, looking out the window, watching Mrs. Weasley hug Ron goodbye. And if you look closely enough, there's something you probably missed. A reflection of someone else in the glass. That's right, Ginny. Of course, later on, Ginny ends up being incredibly important to Harry. I mean, she's the one Harry eventually marries. So including her here, even in such a subtle way, feels very intentional, quietly placing her in the story early, exactly how the books do. If you catch it, it ends up working as a really nice bit of foreshadowing. The coat hanger. In one of the shots of Harry's beautiful cupboard bedroom setup, you can see a coat hanger. And while on its own that might not seem significant, it's actually a direct reference to one of the gifts the Dursleys give Harry. At one point it's mentioned that, as a gift, they gave him a coat hanger and a pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks. Tomorrow, Tuesday, was Harry's 11th birthday. Of course, his birthdays were never exactly fun. Last year, the Dursleys had given him a coat hanger and a pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks. Still, you weren't 11 every day. This is a really nice little detail and another example of HBO paying attention to these smaller things. It's also a subtle but effective way of reinforcing just how bad Harry's living situation really is. The Boy Who Lived. Shortly after Harry arrives at Hogwarts, there's a moment where he's walking with Ron and Hermione. And while this moment may seem relatively innocuous at first, there is actually a significant little detail here you probably missed. And that's another student turning around and staring at him. Now, that might not seem like much, but it's actually a really important detail pulled straight from the books. Because when Harry arrives at Hogwarts, he isn't just another first year. He's already famous. Most of these kids have grown up hearing stories about the boy who lived. They know he survived Voldemort, he has the lightning-shaped scar, and he's basically a legend before he even sets foot in the castle. So naturally, when they finally see him in person, they stare, they whisper, and most relevant here, they try to get a better look. This is something the films never really leaned into all that much. No one really seems to care too much, apart from a few adults that he introduces himself to. The subtle reaction from the other student is a really nice, book-accurate way of showing Harry's significance. Professor Binns. In one of the classroom shots, you can actually see what looks like a ghost floating in front of the class. This one's easy to miss, and I didn't actually see it on the first watch, but I have a strong suspicion that this ghost is Professor Binns. Binns is the ghostly history of magic professor who famously died in the staff room and simply carried on teaching. He plays a surprisingly important role in Chamber of Secrets, telling the story of the chamber itself. The original movies cut Binns entirely, something that's always frustrated book fans, but now HBO is setting the record straight. For the first time, fans will finally get to see Professor Cuthbert Binns, the only ghost teacher at Hogwarts, who was cut from the original films despite playing a vital role in the books. Harry's broom. As the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff Quidditch teams are walking out onto the field, we get a brief shot of the players side by side. Harry isn't even on his broom yet, he's just walking out with the rest of the team. But if you look closely at the players around him, you can see that the broomsticks aren't all the same. The player in front of him is holding a broom that looks noticeably more worn, more basic, while Harry, of course, has the Nimbus 2000. And this is actually very accurate to the books. In the books, Harry of course has his brand spanking new, top-tier, extremely fast Nimbus 2000, while pretty much everyone else is on a ragged old clean sweep. This is significant because it's part of why Harry stands out so quickly as a seeker, but in the films, they never really emphasize this. Most of the brooms look fairly similar, so you don't really get that same contrast. Here though, they've gone out of their way to show that difference, even in a quick background moment. Neville in Herbology. In the trailer, we get a quick look at the Herbology classroom, and while Hermione sort of steals the thunder here, if you know what to look for, you can actually see Neville. This one's easy to miss because it's a completely new actor, so you don't immediately recognize him. But I immediately clocked it because of the setting, Herbology class, and if you know the books, that's kind of Neville's thing. Harry actually studying. One thing I noticed right away is that when Harry's sitting in class, he's actually taking notes. And while this might seem pretty insignificant, it's a bit of a correction that the films didn't really do justice. In the films, there's this tendency to simplify things. Hermione is the smart one, Ron is the comic relief, and Harry kind of sits somewhere in the middle, but leans more toward instinct than intelligence. But in the books, it's a bit more balanced than that. Harry isn't clueless. He's observant, he keeps up in class, and he's perfectly capable. He just isn't as academically driven as Hermione. And Ron, for that matter, isn't an idiot either, but that's a whole separate discussion. The point is, the shot of Harry actually paying attention, taking notes, engaging with the lesson, it's small, but it lines up much more closely with how he's portrayed in the books. And it suggests that the show might be restoring that balance between the trio, instead of flattening them into those more exaggerated roles we got in the films. The Snowball Fight. In the trailer, there's a brief moment that shows the trio having a snowball fight, but what we don't see is that on the other side of the snowball fight is Fred and George, a moment from the books that never made it into the original films. And while it just looks like some fun, it's actually referencing one of the funniest details from the first book. In Philosopher's Stone, Fred and George enchant a bunch of snowballs and start pelting them at the back of Quirrell's head. And while at the time it just seems like classic Fred and George having a bit of fun, we find out later on that Voldemort is attached to the back of Quirrell's head. The lake froze solid and the Weasley twins were punished for bewitching several snowballs so that they followed Quirrell around, bouncing off the back of his turban. What this means, of course, is that they were throwing snowballs right at Voldemort's face. Accidental magic. Like I discussed in the breakdown video, there's one shot in particular that really stuck out to me. Petunia cutting Harry's hair. And if you read the books, you'll recognize exactly what this is referencing. In Philosopher's Stone, Petunia is constantly cutting Harry's hair short, but every time she does, it just goes right back overnight. And this is one of the earliest signs of Harry's performing accidental magic. Now, accidental magic is something the books touch on quite a bit early on. It's magic that young witches and wizards perform without even realizing it, usually when they're stressed, emotional, or trying to get out of a bad situation. Another example of this occurs when Harry's at Muggle school, another scenario that we just don't get to see in the films. Here he's being chased, bullied, and just generally having a rough time. But what this foreshadows is something from the books, Harry accidentally apparating up onto the roof of the school. He'd gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was sitting on the chimney. But all he tried to do was jump behind the big trash cans outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. And again, that's accidental magic. Same with the hair, same with the shrinking clothes that don't fit him. These are all small moments, but they're really important because they establish early on that Harry's magic has always been there. Harry's scar. Harry's physical portrayal in the new series is, for the most part, spot on. If the trailer is anything to go by, I think that Dominic will do a great job stepping into Daniel Radcliffe's shoes. One thing I did notice though, and this is a small one, is that Harry's scar still doesn't appear to be fully book accurate. In the books, it's described as being right on his forehead, basically centered. But here, just like in the original films, it still sits slightly off to the side. To be fair, this isn't a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, but I am a little surprised they didn't fix it, especially with how detail-oriented they've been in other areas. And on that note, that exhausts about the rest of my Easter eggs, at least for now. Comment down below the ones I missed, and until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.